Hi, and welcome back. This week we are talking about fundraising. In fact, this week and next week we're talking about fundraising. It's such an important part of nonprofit management that we have to split it in two. So what we're going to talk about this week is I'm going to give you an overview of some giving patterns in the US. We're going to define some key terms and revisit. I think we've previously talked about the difference between fundraising and philanthropy. We're going to spend a good amount of time this week focusing on the fundraising process, all the steps that go into a fundraising program. And then we're going to focus our time mostly today on giving by individuals. Nonprofit organizations raise funds from individuals, from corporations, from foundations, and some from government grants. And so there's a whole lot to talk about. So today we're going to focus, or this week rather, we're going to focus on giving by individuals. And hopefully, you will learn. We're going to talk about what goes into an effective fundraising appeal. So I'm actually really excited about this topic. This was a huge function of my career for a very long time. Before I was an executive director, I spent many, many years in fundraising, and I've done it all. I've been in charge of individual fundraising. I've been in charge of corporate foundation fundraising. I've written government grants, been involved in special events. So I've done a little bit of everything, but I don't think anybody could be considered an expert in fundraising. But fundraising is the most important aspect of managing a nonprofit organization. Many organizations offer services and they charge a fee for those services. For example, a hospital, charges fees for the services they provide. A symphony orchestra or a ballet or an opera company charges a ticket price for you to go see those performances. A college like Dutchess Community College charges tuition. The American Red Cross, which does both blood donation and disaster relief. They actually sell blood to hospitals. They provide disaster relief, but you could go onto their website and you could buy a little emergency kit. So there's lots of ways that organizations bring in money, bring in earned revenue. But usually in most cases with nonprofit organizations, that's not enough. So here at Dutchess Community College, your tuition does not cover the full expenses of the college. At a typical symphony orchestra or ballet or opera company, the ticket prices never cover. In fact, when I worked for the Pittsburgh Symphony, I think we used to tell people, just because I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was something like tickets only covered about 45% of the total costs of running the orchestra and putting those performances together. And so part of our fundraising appeal and our fundraising messages, we kind of talk about that if we charged, if our ticket prices reflected the actual cost of the organization, most people wouldn't be able to afford to come because those ticket prices would be so expensive. So fundraising is, I don't know of too many organizations that don't, nonprofits that don't get involved in fundraising. Very, very few are fortunate to not have to go out and raise funds, but the overwhelming majority do. And so while there is often a development director or someone in charge of fundraising at an organization, the executive director is always involved to some extent, and to a large extent, the executive director and the board chair and the board members in general. So this is a big topic. This whole topic of fundraising could literally be a semester-long course. So it's overwhelming for me, actually, to, as I've been putting this chapter together and finding resources of trying to distill it down into the most important things for you to learn in the larger context of nonprofit organizations and nonprofit management. So I hope that I give you enough information but if anything I don't include here, you'll see in next week. All right, so let's get into this. So I just want you to stop for a moment and think about these two questions that are going to pop up here. Why do you think people make donations to nonprofits? Why have you made donations to nonprofits, or why would you? And also think about this. We know most nonprofit organizations have limited resources. So do you think an organization, whether it's the SPCA or a local hospital or a local performing arts organization or a museum or an organization that provides veteran services, do you think it would make more sense to focus on raising 1,000 gifts of $25, which would be $25,000, or should they focus on soliciting just one gift of $25,000? I've done both, and both are important to an organization. There is something to be said for having a mass number of people, kind of the idea of crowdfunding, having a large number of people giving small amounts. There's also a lot to be said for focusing your time and effort on that one gift of $25,000. So I think you'll see this question again in your discussion. So let's talk about giving, though. 2020 was, we all know what happened in 2020 with the pandemic, and certainly that caused a lot of angst among all types of organizations. We saw, people lose their jobs. When people lose their jobs, sometimes there is a fear that they're going to give a little bit less to charity, but in fact, that wasn't the case in 2020. And in fact, $471.4 billion was donated, and that was an increase over the prior year. There's an annual study by an organization called Giving USA that works in conjunction with the Center on Philanthropy at Indiana University. And these were the figures that they reported. And so of that $471 billion, 69, so nearly 70% of all charitable giving in the United States comes from individuals. And again, those individuals are giving $5, $10, $25. They're giving $25,000. They're giving $1 million. Some of them are even giving $5 and $10 million. But the overwhelming majority of donations come from individuals. That has always been the case. Corporations, and we're going to talk about foundations and corporations, and government grants generally don't count as charity or philanthropy, but we'll still talk about that in next week's module. But corporations contributed about 4%. Sometimes it seems like more because, you go to Stop and Shop and they're asking you to, round up for charity, or we see that, if you buy, I don't know, a can of Campbell's soup in the month of October, some percentage of that is going towards breast cancer research. But truly, corporate support it's just a tiny fraction of overall giving. Foundations, private foundations provide almost 20%, or actually 19% of total support, which is pretty significant. And then you will learn about something called bequests, and that's money that people leave in their wills. So they're no longer alive and they've passed on, but through their will, they're leaving a legacy or a bequest to an organization. But individual giving is the heart and the backbone of nonprofit organizations and of charitable giving. So just a little bit more of a breakdown. So we saw that individual giving increased by 2.2%. And I have this there's a link in your chapter resources that has a nice snapshot of this report with a little bit more information. And in all likelihood, because of the pandemic, people did give more. There was many people got their stimulus checks and thought, what, I still have my job. I got a stimulus check. I'm going to do something for the greater good. People saw so many others around them suffering, and so giving increased quite a bit by individuals. Giving by foundations was an all-time high in 2020, which also makes sense and is also very likely a response to the pandemic. Giving by bequests increased due to some changes to tax laws, or rather in spite of changes to tax laws, but in all likelihood, that happened because of stock market growth. So I'll explain that in a little bit. Unsurprisingly, giving by corporations actually declined by 6.1%. And that's not a surprise. We saw corporations lose money. We saw corporations have to lay off staff. And so that there is not a surprise. But on the other hand, we could take a different look at this and say, individuals in this country in 2020, a lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of people felt really, even if they had a good job, they weren't 100% sure that job was going to make it. Yet individuals increased their giving in 2020, and corporations, although many corporations did lose money, many corporations are still doing very well, and their giving decreased quite a bit. So there's a whole commentary there that I'll let you mull over in your head. In terms of subsector, so where did all this money go? Where did people give in 2020? That $3.71 billion. 28% of it went to religion, which is normally the largest subsector of charitable giving in the U.S. 15% went to education, and so on and so forth. These numbers I don't think these numbers changed all that much. This is a pretty standard allocation of where charitable gifts go towards. Religion, education, and human services have always been the largest. So let's talk about a few key terms and definitions. So I think we introduced this back in week 1 or week 2, but we define charity as giving to immediate needs, right? It's very we're looking at short-term needs. So, the SPCA, I got to stop using that as an example because I clearly can't say it clearly. But when there's a need for, it's kitten season, they often, put fundraising requests out there saying, we need to take care of all these kittens. Or when, during the COVID crisis, a lot of organizations were asking for support to help people who were in need right then and there. And so charity is about meeting an immediate need. It's very reactive. It's generally short term, like here's a crisis, here's a problem, here's a need. This is what we're going to do this year to mitigate this need. These are the people we're helping. So these tend to be smaller gifts. This is that $5 and $50 and $100 and perhaps $500 gift. That is what we call charity. Philanthropy, on the other hand, is bigger. Philanthropy is making large gifts that create transformational change, that are generally strategic in nature. Philanthropy is when people start giving $100,000, $500,000, $1 million, $5 million. So when you hear about, for example, work that Bill Gates, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is doing to eradicate malaria in Africa, or to provide technology to schools and libraries in the US, that is philanthropy. Mackenzie, I can't remember her last name. I got it. Mackenzie Scott, who became a billionaire because she is the former spouse of Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon. She's an incredibly intelligent and successful woman in her own right, but There's no question that she's a billionaire and now a billionaire philanthropist because of money she received in their divorce settlement. But she's doing some incredible things around philanthropy and actually supporting education and supporting a lot of community colleges. Unfortunately, not Duchess, but she is over the past year or about year to 2 years has been giving like these enormous, gifts of 10 million and 15 million and $1 billion to organizations, which is life-changing. Certainly it's transformational. That's the kind of money that creates new programs, that builds buildings, that funds significant research. So again, that's just the difference between charity and philanthropy. For the most part of this module, I'm going to be talking about charity. Next week, when we talk about corporate and foundation support, I'm also going to talk about what are called capital campaigns. When an organization is trying to raise a very significant amount of money to make big, transformational change, that is usually a little more philanthropy oriented. Some other terms: fundraising, what we're talking about. It's not just the actual act of soliciting, of asking for a gift, but it's a whole process, because you just don't walk up to a stranger and say, hey, will you support our organization? You could do that, but it's not the most effective thing. And so we have the idea of fundraising, which is really the bigger picture, versus soliciting, which is asking for the gift. Development is often a term that's used to talk about fundraising. So the job of fundraising in a nonprofit organization would fall under a director of development, whose job it is to work with the board of trustees and work with the executive director or CEO and create a plan and an approach for the long-term growth of the organization. It's ongoing. Institutional advancement is just another kind of a layer above. Some organizations, particularly you see this in colleges, you have an Office of Institutional Advancement, which is where they bring fundraising, development, communications, marketing, and all of these things under one umbrella. Because for a lot of nonprofit organizations, marketing and fundraising and public relations go hand in hand. They almost can't be separated. It depends on the organization, but they're so intertwined. The messages that, if you're trying to say market programs and services, the messages of that are also very similar to your fundraising messages and vice versa. So you start to see different terms. And sometimes these terms are used interchangeably. Development and institutional advancement. It really tends to often depend on the size of the organization. So moving on to our fundraising process, I'm going to show it to you in a 6-step process. You could go search online and you'll see a 4-step process, a 5-step process, an 8-step process. They're all, iterations of essentially the same thing. So we're going to talk about these 6: determining priorities and developing a case, identifying and qualifying prospects, cultivating prospects, soliciting the gift, acknowledging and recognizing the donor, and something called stewardship. And so in a large development office, so I've worked in organizations where all 6 of these sort of tasks were separate jobs. I've also worked in organizations where I was the director of development, and it was my job to do all 6 of these things. So again, how the tasks of these different processes are divided up is always going to depend on the size and scope of your organization and how much money you're raising. So the first step is, what are your priorities, right? When you're thinking about fundraising for any organization, whether it's Hudson River Housing or the National Firefighters Foundation or the Alzheimer's Research or the American Cancer Society or the Duchess SPCA, you have to figure out what are your funding priorities, And then you have to build a case around that. So in terms of priorities, that is absolutely a product of strategic planning. That's why last week we talked about strategic planning, and how your mission leads to strategic planning, which results in your programs and services. And so that strategic plan helps you identify what are you doing in the current, this year, next year, and the year after. Are you growing your programs and services? Are you planning to offer more programs and services? Are you going to increase the number of people that you serve? Whatever that is, those priorities drive your fundraising, because then you start to think about, okay, well, in order to launch this new program or offer these new services, we need funding. We need to raise money in order to do it. In order to serve more people, you may have to raise more money to serve more people. And so whatever comes out of that strategic plan for any given year sets the overall tone and direction for your fundraising program. So it's always important every single year in a nonprofit organization to revisit. That's why that strategic plan is so important, to revisit that strategic plan and see how is fundraising going to support that strategic plan? Where is funding needed? And how can fundraising help you get there? And then from there, you start to build a case statement. So again, next week, we're going to talk about these bigger campaigns that involve, large philanthropic gifts, where a case statement is a much more formal process. But even from year to year in an organization, you start to think about your case. Why would people give to us? Why does someone want to support our organization? What can we say that's going to make a compelling argument, or that's going to be convincing? What is important about the programs that we do? So it's one of the things I had you guys do in your first written assignment was really take a look at what does your organization do? How'd you do that for your discussion the previous week? Take a look at the mission and what programs or services do you believe are most closely aligned with that mission? Chances are that's the type of thing. Those are the types of programs and services that you would be talking about when you're making a case statement. When you ask that question of why would someone give to this organization? Because as soon as whether you send out an email appeal or a letter, the person or put something on Facebook or social media, the person reading it or receiving it is saying, why should I give? Why should I give to this organization? Of all the nonprofit organizations in my community, of all the organizations whose values match up with mine, why should I give to this specific organization? And that's a question that your case statement answers. It also answers the question of, why is this cause more important than others? Why should I give to an animal shelter when there are children who are homeless? Why should I give to the American Cancer Society when there are other people suffering from Alzheimer's or various disabilities? So again, there are many great organizations. There are many great causes. And so your case statement, again, when you're thinking about, okay, all of the ways that you want to fundraise for the year, it's really important to think about what is the case that we're making. And you don't necessarily have to have a different case statement every single year, but you want to take some time and make sure that based on your strategic priorities, how can you build a case for support around that? The next step in the process is to do some prospect research. Most organizations have a list, right? They have a list of potential donors. So when I worked for the Pittsburgh Symphony many years ago, we had a list of people who had been giving to us for a long time. We also had concert goers every single year. There were people who came to listen to symphony concerts who had never come before. So they immediately become prospects. But before you can raise money, you also need to take a look at, all right, well, do they have the capacity or the financial ability to give? Are they truly interested in our organization? Did someone come once or did they come 5 times, right? Someone who comes to the symphony, buys one ticket and comes one time, maybe as an organization, you want them to come. Okay, they've come to a concert. We want them to come to more concerts. Once they start to establish themselves as a patron, and once they establish themselves as someone who is going to come to this organization or really values what we do because they continue to buy tickets, then they might become a prospect for fundraising. Then you can start to make the case because we know how much you love this. And so if you've taken a marketing class and you've learned anything about segmentation or target marketing, prospect research and qualifying your prospects is kind of the same thing. So most organizations, for example, you might have received something in your home, or your parents, somebody in your home might have received, a fundraising appeal from an organization. Usually that is done because you have some connection to that organization. So perhaps you were a patient at a hospital, or perhaps you were a Girl Scout or a Boy Scout, right? Those organizations look to alumni. When you graduate from Dutchess Community College, you're going to get a solicitation. You're going to be asked to give money from the Dutchess Community College Foundation. That's because you have some kind of relationship to the organization. And so this is done, in many different ways. If you're sending out a direct mail appeal or an email appeal, you probably don't need to qualify your prospects as much because it's really costing you next to nothing to send that appeal out. But if you were going to be asking someone for $5,000 or $10,000 on behalf of your organization, you need to do your research. One, to make sure you really understand their capacity to give, but also to really understand their connection to your organization. So kind of how much you qualify, or the extent to which you qualify your prospects, is going to depend honestly on how much you're asking them for. But in terms of identifying, you also want to be effective, and you want to spend your time asking people who are most likely to support your organization. Then you want to also think about cultivating those prospects, developing a relationship before you ask for a gift. Now, again, this is always going to be dependent on how much you're asking for. You wouldn't just randomly ask someone who, I'll use my symphony as an example. Just because someone went to a concert once doesn't mean we're going to ask them for a $10,000 gift. But you know what? We might drop them into our direct mail or email appeal and ask them for $25, right? But the larger the gift, the more time you want to spend cultivating that prospect, developing a relationship with them, understanding what matters to them, so that you can really start to develop a very personalized appeal to them. Then the fourth step is, so we've figured out what our priorities in our case is. We've started to identify different prospects. And again, that can come from, hey, let's figure out how we can ask everyone who's received services from our organization in the past 2 years. Let's reach out to people who follow us on Facebook or Instagram. So you pull together this prospect list. A list of addresses, a list of emails, a list of phone numbers, whatever it might be. And then you start to, qualify who you're going to ask for what. Those who are very likely to be larger asks, you're going to probably spend a little more time cultivating them and making it more personal. And then you come to the point of soliciting the gift. First thing to do is figure out a method of solicitation, which we'll get to in the next slide. And then again, costs and benefits. So that goes back to those first questions I asked you. Should you spend the time and money and effort in asking 1,000 people to give $25? Or should you spend the time and effort to ask one person to give $25,000? They can both take the same amount of time. $25,000, even for someone who's extremely wealthy, is still a lot of money to give away. And so you have to figure out what method or methods of solicitation are you going to use. And that goes into, costs and benefits. And also the organization's life cycle. That's not something we've really talked about yet. A brand new organization, let's say a nonprofit that was founded, say, a year ago, is going to solicit gifts very differently than an organization that's been around for 100 years. Because the newer organization has something to prove, right? They're not necessarily a trusted source, whereas, the American Cancer Society has been around for a very, very long time. But a brand new cancer organization, it's just going to feel a little risky, right? And so how you solicit gifts is going to be also dependent on where the organization is in its life cycle. What's the likelihood of reaching your target audience? So in terms of using that method of solicitation, is your audience a group that's going to read along email, or would they rather just watch a video that they access through social media? Or do you perhaps have an older audience who actually prefers to get a piece of mail and will actually read, a 1, 2, even 3-page letter? Some people are very happy to give over the phone. If they've been donating to an organization for many years, they trust it, they know the people there, then they're going to pick up the phone and when asked, they'll give someone their credit card. So again, it all depends on your target audience, and any one organization might have 5 different kind of donor audiences, and they sort of customize not just the message, but the method of solicitation to those different target audiences. And then, of course, you want to have a very personalized approach, which we'll talk to when we get to the end of this. So in terms of soliciting the gift, you can do this personal and face-to-face. So in the example of asking someone for $5,000, $10,000, $25,000, that is almost always going to be personal solicitation. That is going to happen over lunch, over dinner, visiting someone at their office, setting up an appointment. That is something that is very deliberate. You've developed a relationship with this person. You've gotten to know them. You understand what they're most interested in. You're probably really customizing your ask. Of specifically what you're asking them to support. It's going to be very, very personal, and usually in person. Doesn't mean that you can't call this person up on the phone and firm up their gift, or do it by Zoom. I'm sure a lot of organizations, a lot of fundraising was done over Zoom over the past year and a half. But the larger the gift is generally happening face to face. You can use direct mail, still very, very popular. Becoming less popular because paper's expensive, postage is expensive. People tend to not open their mail as much as they used to. And so email solicitation has become extremely popular. It is extremely inexpensive. And there are a lot of, there are so many platforms out there that allow you to make these beautiful email appeals incorporating video and donation pages. There's really some fantastic stuff out there. And you see that more and more and more. We've seen that all through the pandemic. And as you get closer to the holiday season, and from Thanksgiving through December, you'll also see a lot more email appeals. Peer-to-peer and crowd, think about crowdfunding. You're all familiar with GoFundMe for a variety of things. There's a lot of peer-to-peer fundraising, and that's become something that's really effective. So whether that's using a crowdfunding platform because you are participating in a breast cancer walk where, you fill out a page and why this cause is so important to you, and then you're posting that on your social media and emailing it to friends and family. That's called peer-to-peer fundraising. We see this on social media all the time now. In fact, I find it a little annoying. I log on to Facebook and, everybody's asking for donations now. But again, it's extremely effective because fundraising is personal. Fundraising should be as personal as possible. And so organizations, started finding out how successful it was when, the organization can send out this big, massive, direct mail or email appeal, or they can get key volunteers, board members, volunteers, people who have benefited from that organization's services, and get them to start fundraising from their friends. And it's a wonderful way to bring more people into your organization who might not have otherwise supported it. But you think, oh, hey, Kendra is really passionate about this organization, and Kendra's doing this fundraiser for her birthday, so I'm going to spend $25 and support Kendra's cause. Now, I may or may not develop a relationship with that organization, but it's really a wonderful way to raise money, and it's something that just gets more and more popular every year. And then, of course, there are events. Again, that event could be, so there can be combinations of all of these things. So that event could be that breast cancer walk that you pay to participate. That's a donation, or you support a friend who's walking in it. But then also at that event, they might be, have other ways to raise money, or be collecting donations, or just holding events, holding galas, holding, it could, a PTA, or when you were in grade school, and if those of you who are on sports teams or band or some different types of activities, very often you had candy fundraisers, or selling wrapping paper, or selling popcorn, all those types of things. So there's, that old-fashioned peer-to-peer where, you come home with a little sign-up form and ask people to buy Girl Scout cookies or what have you, or other types of big, massive events, whether it's a big black tie gala event or a walk across the walkway over the Hudson to raise money for some organization. So there are certainly other ways to solicit gifts from individuals, but these are certainly the 5 most common: face-to-face, direct mail, email, peer-to-peer, and events. And just some examples of some different things. So over here on the right, I think it's the right, it's my right, is an example of a year-end appeal fundraising letter, which, is usually colorful. There's pictures, there's a donation form, an email appeal from an organization that, again, is great because you can put great pictures in there. You can have a donate now button to make it really easy for people to give. And then another type of sort of event and crowdfunding and email, kind of all wrapped into one, are giving days. And so a movement started, I don't know the exact date, I want to say about 10 years ago, called Giving Tuesday. So we know that the day after Thanksgiving is often referred to as Black Friday. It's a big holiday shopping day. And it's called Black Friday because it's often the day that in the retail business, they're finally in the black. They finally start to show a profit. And so then, as we became in the late 90s and early 2000s, when suddenly people really started doing more online shopping, Cyber Monday emerged. And the reason it was called Cyber Monday is because, again, back in 1999, 98, 99, 2000, not everybody had great internet at home, but they went to work and they had an excellent internet connection. And so the Monday after Thanksgiving, people would go to work and do all their online shopping. Online holiday shopping. So that is referred to as Cyber Monday. And so a few years after that, I think in the late 90s, about 10, 12 years ago. So in like the 2010s, a movement emerged for Giving Tuesday. the idea saying, okay, it's the year end. This is a time that a lot of charitable organizations are asking for much needed year end gifts. And you've just, spent all this commercial money shopping on Friday and Monday. So let's set aside Tuesday as a day to support the causes that are important to us. So Giving Tuesday emerged. That idea of a day of giving, of a single day focused on giving, has now evolved even further. And in different communities across the country, they'll have a special giving day. So in May of every year, about the third week of May, within the Hudson Valley, there's something called Hudson Valley Gives, and that's sponsored by the community foundations of Orange and Ulster and Sullivan, and a couple of other organizations sponsor it. And it's just, again, a day to focus on, let's set aside one day a year where we focus on supporting different organizations here in the Hudson Valley. Some individual organizations, my alma mater, the University of Pittsburgh, has a Pitt Day of Giving. Where I went to grad school, I went to Hofstra University. They also have a Hofstra Day of Giving. So this is a thing that has, again, evolved from Giving Tuesday to individual organizations or communities also focusing on that. So that's an interesting way of kind of looking at individual giving and bringing in, kind of combining the best of email, of social media, of peer-to-peer, an event and sort of special event giving, because what most organizations do is start building up, so probably the 1st of November, organizations will start putting messaging out and start reminding people and preparing them to make their gift on Giving Tuesday. So once you have made your solicitation, so you've put this great case for support together and crafted a message around that. You have put together a prospect list, done some cultivation where needed, and then you've solicited your gift. You've put this great message together. You picked the variety of methods that you're going to use, and you've raised money. You've brought gifts in. Now you need to acknowledge and recognize donors. Which is really a nice, a convoluted way of saying you need to say thank you, right? You need to say thank you. All donors should be acknowledged. They should be thanked for their gift, and they should be thanked as soon as possible. And especially as people are, more and more people are making online donations, they want to be sure that the donation got to where it was supposed to. And so there are some IRS requirements. So at certain levels, at certain dollar amounts, I think if you give $250 or more to an organization, then they're required by the IRS to send you an acknowledgement letter with some information about the tax deductibility of your gift. But whether someone gives you $5 or $250, it's really a good idea to thank them. And then at certain levels, different organizations have giving clubs and giving societies. And so sometimes at a certain level, you're thanked on a web page, you're thanked in an annual report, you're thanked at an event. Sometimes plaques are put up, buildings are named after you. Again, that depends on the size and scope of your gift and your organization. But the point here is to thank people. You can never thank someone enough. And in fact, this process is cyclical. So if we went back and we looked at it, and it's a circle. So part of cultivating someone, to give to you again and again and again is, how do you thank them? How do you acknowledge them? Do you then only communicate with them? Next, I'm going to skip to the next one, which is stewardship. Because the best prospect for a future gift is a previous donor. And so let's say your friend Kendra is supporting, is doing the breast cancer walk and supporting the Miles of Hope Breast Cancer Foundation, which is a Hudson Valley based organization. And let's say, you decide to support Kendra because this is really, she's really passionate about this cause. And so you make a $25 donation simply because of Kendra. But if the organization is smart, they're going to promptly thank you for your gift. And then periodically through the year, they're going to send you information. They're going to tell you what your gift made happen. They're going to tell you all the great things that their organization does, so that when the next, when they're doing their next fundraising appeal or their next, walk event, their big fundraising event, that they've kept in touch with you. They've provided stewardship. Those of you who are religious, stewardship is similar to the idea of fellowship, in that it's about this building this ongoing relationship with the donor. And so you want to keep them, there's two really important things to do. You want to keep this donor actively engaged, so that they're not a one-time donor, so that they keep coming back and then start bringing their friends and family on board. But you also want to manage the money responsibly. So you should be reporting back periodically, hey, this is what we do with our money, and this is how much of your donation goes to support the, these mission-based activities of our organization. So you spend the money responsibly, right? You spend the money responsibly, and you keep the donor engaged with relevant information. And then the process starts all over again. And this is what fundraising is. And you're going through this process sometimes multiple times throughout a year. So, on the one hand, you could say, okay, this is our fundraising plan for the year, but chances are you have a lot of little campaigns and events going on throughout the year, so that this process can seem never ending. So why do people give? Again, goes back to one of the questions I asked you in the very first slide. Why do people give? We talk about the tax deductibility of 501c3 organizations. So remember, there was the 501c3 and the 501c4. And with 501c3 organizations, which are providing more of a public benefit, we know that gifts to those organizations are tax deductible. But is that why people give? Is that why someone gives to the Alzheimer's Association or the SPCA or to Hudson River Housing or to the Food Bank of the Hudson Valley or to the Bardavon Theater or to Vassar Hospital? Do they give because their gift is tax deductible? Usually no. In fact, I'm going to be pretty bold and say almost never. The timing of a gift, when we get to talk about philanthropy and those big, larger gifts, if someone's going to give $100,000 or $500,000 or $1 million to an organization, they're still not giving that just for the tax benefit, but they might time when they give that gift based on the tax, or how they give that gift. They might give it in a way that is most beneficial to reducing their taxes. But people give because they want to help someone, right? They give because they believe in a cause, because they are passionate about a cause. They are it's in their nature to help others, someone who's less fortunate or someone who needs help, or because research needs to be done. People give to the American Cancer Society because they themselves or someone in their family has been affected by cancer. People give to the Alzheimer's Association because a grandparent or a parent has Alzheimer's. People give to the SPCA because they love animals and they've adopted an animal from the SPCA. So many people just are simply altruistic, right? They just it's part of their nature to help others. And it makes them feel good, right? So, maybe someone is slightly motivated by their name going on a building or a little plaque being put up somewhere. And we see it all the time. You walk in your average park and there's, often a little nameplate that a park bench was donated in somebody's honor, or somebody donated and got their name on a little park bench. That's usually icing on the cake. Again, and I say this as someone who worked for nonprofits and fundraised for about 18 years of my career. And I can't think of a single time where tax deduction was the number one reason that anybody gave, nor was getting their name on something. That was never the reason they gave. It might be the reason they gave a little bit more, but it still wasn't the reason that they gave. They gave because they believed in the mission of the organization and the programs and services that the organization offered. So that connection to mission. But there is a theory out there that there are 7 motivational types when it comes to donors, when it comes to individual donors. Communitarian, some people just, they want to give something for the good of their community. I live here. I'm doing okay. I've got a little extra money. I'm going to support the community that I live in. Simply because I believe in supporting the greater good. There are donors whose motivation is because they're devout and they give based on their religious beliefs. Many give to their faith-based organization, to their church or synagogue or mosque, or they give to faith-based organizations. Again, there are people who are investors. Again, I think there's very few people, I got 18 years experience doing this. Very few people give solely for the tax benefit. However, that term investor, though, I think does matter because there are people who believe in investing in a cause. Yeah, if I support this, it's an investment in my community. It's an investment in keeping kids off the streets. It's an investment of, getting jobs for the homeless and the jobless. So there are many people who look at a donation as an investment in the organization. There are people who do it for social interaction. It's, you get in, when you're a large donor to an organization or even just a regular donor, you get invited to things and it can be very social. Some people are truly selfless, right? They're giving because there's something beyond themselves. Repairs, that's, when I said that someone might donate to the American Cancer Society because they or someone in their family was affected by cancer, they're repaying, right? Maybe they felt like they got great benefits from, there's a local organization called the Sparrow's Nest that provides meals for families where the parent or someone in the household has cancer. So the idea being like, say a busy mom has breast cancer, she's coming back from treatment and taking care of your family is just a whole lot. And so they provide this incredible meal service. So the idea that a cancer survivor who received support from Sparrow's Nest might want to give back, or their family might want to give back. And then there's a 7th kind of motivation, which is, like a family dynasty, a family tradition of support. And we certainly see this at the higher giving levels when we talk about true philanthropy. But even, in your own family, there just might be a tradition of, again, supporting your religious organization, or there might be a tradition of, if your parents went to college, maybe there's a tradition in your family of supporting one or more of their alma maters, or just a family tradition of going to making an annual donation of, dog food to the SPCA. So lots of different reasons that people give, but all of these reasons are still rooted in the organization's mission, right? A person is still, whether they're giving $5 or $500,000, they have to have a connection to the mission of the organization. They have to believe in the mission of the organization and recognize the benefits of your organization and how it helps people and what problems it's trying to solve. So that connection to mission is always, always there. And again, this is a continuum, and people can move along this continuum. And people also, their motivation for donating money can also change throughout what we call a donor life cycle. And so when you think of an organization, so I'm going to go back and I'm going to use I'm going to use the example of a college. I'll actually use Dutchess Community College. So when we think about the total constituency of Dutchess Community College, We have students, we have faculty, we have staff, we have a board of directors, and we have alumni, right? So if we were to talk about stakeholders, we could add about 10 more groups. But when we think about the constituency, the people most affected and impacted by Dutchess Community College, it's current students, alumni, faculty, staff, board. So some percentage of that constituency make annual or regular gifts to the Dutchess Community College Foundation. So again, people who give $20, $50, $100. And they're happy to do it annually, whether they do that by going to the gala every year or supporting, say, for example, the DCC pantry, or just, supporting general operating funds. Then there are people who move up the ladder a little bit, a smaller group of people who make what are called major or special gifts. And so that might be someone who, maybe an alum, 20 years later, they've been really successful, and they've been giving annually, maybe $100 a year, but they get to a point in life where they want to do something more. And they maybe reflect about, the start that DCC gave them. Perhaps they had a scholarship that really helped them. And so they want to give back and they want to set up a scholarship at DCC. So maybe they make a $10,000 gift and set up a scholarship fund. And that's great. And that's not something that you do very often. Maybe every couple of years, maybe you give $10,000 in 2021, but it might be another 10 years before you give that kind of money again. But that's the idea of a major or special gift. A principal, or what is often considered an ultimate gift, might be that one time in your life that you're going to give a very transformative, impactful gift. So this might be that same donor. Let's say that donor gave their $10,000 gift to create a scholarship. But then another 20 years goes by and they're like, they're reflecting on your life. These principal or ultimate gifts tend to happen when people are a little bit older. They are both older and have more money. And so this donor has had an ongoing relationship, is cultivated, is always thanked for their gifts, made to feel really special by the college. And they decide to give, maybe the college is having a big capital campaign because it wants to build a new building or something. And they go to this donor and they ask this donor for $1 million. That's what would be considered a principal or ultimate gift. That you're not going to give that very often. You're going to give it maybe once. You're going to give, if you're going to give $1 million, you're probably not going to do that on an annual basis. And so, and that ultimate gift could be different for everyone, right? Someone could, leave $10,000 in their will because that's the most that they can give, but it's still transformative. It's a big deal. So again, the size and the amounts don't necessarily matter because the amounts are relative. But the idea is over time, and you develop relationships, but that $1 million donor still probably started out somewhere around $100. They don't just, $1 million donors just don't wake up and out of the blue. Rarely. Not to say it never happens, but rarely. Just someone out of the blue just decide to give $1 million somewhere. All right, so just a few more things as we talk about donor life cycles and talk about different gift types. So there's 3 primary ways that people support nonprofit organizations through donations. One is operating support. And these are unrestricted gifts that can be used for anything in the organization. It's kind of like money that goes into the checking account. So a typical nonprofit organization has to pay staff salaries. It has, it pays for its programs. But it's also got to pay the electric company, and it's also got to buy computers. And so operating support is unrestricted. And so that money comes in, and the executive director and the board of directors can determine that it can be spent on anything that's part of the organization's budget. And so when you see an annual appeal, when you see the, please support the Hudson Valley, the food bank of the Greater Hudson Valleys year-end giving campaign, that money is going for general operating support. Another common way that organizations seek support is specifically for programs. And so this money would be restricted. So for example, if you were to give money to Dutchess Community College and say that you want it to go towards scholarships, it could only be used for scholarships. It can't be used for anything else. And if there's no scholarships to give that year, then that money can't be spent. So program support could be for a scholarship. It could be for an after-school program. It could be for patient services at a cancer foundation. It could be, I know one of your classmates is writing about the organization that supports families of fallen firefighters. And so that organization, if you were to give to that organization and say, I don't want my money to go towards operating support. I only want it to go to direct services to families of fallen firefighters, then it would have to be restricted for that purpose. And then a third way, and this is again where philanthropy often comes in, is endowment support. And that's when you're contributing funds, and it's actually kind of like a savings account. And these funds are permanently restricted, and you can only spend investment income. So you might often hear about organizations, like Harvard University has something like a $40 billion endowment. They can't touch that $40 billion, right? That $40 billion is called the principal, and it has to be untouched. But what you can spend is the savings from it. So it's kind of like a retirement. Actually, an endowment is very much like someone's retirement savings. Like, you don't ever want to touch the principal. You want that to keep growing and growing and growing. But let's say it earns, this money is often invested in the stock market or mutual funds or other financial instruments. And the idea is if it earns 10%, you still only want to spend about 3 or 4% of that. But we'll talk about that a little bit more next week. Operating support is, again, just, we talk about individuals being the heart and soul of fundraising. I would also say that general operating support is the heart and soul of most nonprofit organizations. They need general operating support. If you've got a good executive director and you've got a good board of directors who are doing their fiduciary responsibility for the organization, then the funds are going to be spent in the way that is most beneficial to the community and in support of the mission. And so having those funds be unrestricted just helps the organization direct them to where they're needed most. But program support can also be very important, because that's where you might say, okay, we have this strategic goal of launching this new program to support this particular group of people with these particular services, but we need funding to do so. And so program support can also be really helpful so that you can start to build up a base of support for that and a source of funds for those programs. All right, just a little bit more information about giving gift types. So annual gifts or regular gifts are generally part of that general operating support, or part of what is called an annual fund. People tend to give. People are actually pretty good about. I think the standard is you want to get about 80% of your donors to renew every year. And so these annual gifts, or sometimes called regular gifts, come through all those different methods that we talked about: personal solicitation, mail. Telemarketing isn't quite as popular as it used to be. Email and social media are certainly emerging as the most popular ways to ask. And then you have, again, we talked a little bit about those major gifts and principal or ultimate gifts. So we actually already talked about those a little bit more. So I won't spend any more time on that. But let's finish up with our last topic. And while we're already at an hour, our last topic for this week is how to write an effective fundraising appeal. And so there are a few must-haves. There has to be a specific and clear call to action. What do you want someone to do? You want them to give. Believe it or not, there's a lot of fundraising appeals that go out without ever actually asking someone to give. So you've got to have a very specific call to action. What are you asking them for, and how do they do it? You have to create a sense of urgency, because you want someone to not think about, right? If you're expecting someone to give $50, you don't want them to think about it for a very long time. It's not so much, I'm not trying to say you want to manipulate them like it's some crazy, impulse purchase, but you want to create a sense of urgency. Like, no, you have to do this now. You can't put this aside and come back to it in a month. We need you to do this today. It's really important that you talk about your beneficiaries in a really impactful way. Like, what happens in your community? What is it that you do better than anybody else that can only happen because of my donation? And you want to also include a story, something that is emotional, that draws on that urgency and that call to action, so that, yes, I want to do this today. This is, this organization is doing things that are really impactful, and here's proof of it, right? So you're saying, here's what we want you to do. Here's why it's important that you do it now. Here's what we do with your money. Like, here's the impact that we have on our local community. And now here's proof of it. Here's a story about one of our beneficiaries. You want to make it personal. And so I say that and I mean two things by that. To the extent that you can, you want to actually send your letter to an actual person. You don't want to say, dear friend. You want to say, dear Maureen, dear Kendra, dear James. It should also come from a real person. It should be, if it's email, it shouldn't just come from some random email box. It should come from the executive director of the organization, or it should come from the board of the board chair, or it could be signed by someone benefiting from the services. So I can't tell you how effective that is. I've worked for colleges where you have a student sign a letter, or I've worked for hospitals where you have a patient sign a letter. I've worked for a girls leadership organization where we had one of our campers sign a letter. That kind of personal touch really makes a big difference to people. You want it to be visually appealing. It shouldn't be a million words, right? You've got to find a way to get your words out there, but also use images and space and colors and things to just make it very visually appealing. If you're sending an email or using social media, so if you're sending an email, you have to use a very powerful subject line, something that's going to get opened. Or if it's social media, your headline, right, should be very impactful so that someone wants to click through and read it. And then you have to make giving easy, right? Too many organizations, I think about when you're shopping online, when you have to click 4 or 5 times before you finally get to the place where you're entering your credit card, many of us walk away and lose interest. So you need to make it easy to give. So even if you're sending someone a direct mail appeal that's showing up in their mailbox at home, make it easy to give, right? Make it easy for someone to go online, because people don't seem to want to write checks anymore, or they don't want to write their credit card number down and then send it in the mail. Make it easy for someone to go online and donate without having to sign up for this, that, and the other thing. Just make it very easy for someone to go in and donate quickly and easily, whether that's through social media, whether that's through your website, whether it's through PayPal, something. Just make it very easy to give. I've included this in your chapter resources. year-end fundraising template that kind of goes off of all those things, and it just sort of shows you, start with your salutation, come up with some sort of emotional opening, a story that illustrates the need or impact of your organization, make a call to action. And again, it's okay to say a couple times in a letter, please give today, or please, consider giving $50 today. Your gift of $200 will guarantee more children like John will graduate this year. Please join today. Then you talk about how your donations help. Then you have a second call to action. So again, repetition becomes very important. Then a closing, and then maybe even a little PS. That's very common. This is so typical. This is very, very typical of what any fundraising appeal, but particularly a year-end fundraising appeal. Giving at the holidays is a very, very big time, and sometimes it's the single. Many organizations bring in the most amount of money at the end of the year. So this is a really, really excellent fundraising appeal, and I have a feeling you're going to see it again in one of your assignments. So that's it for this one, an hour and 5 minutes. I'm sorry, I really could have talked for about another 2 to 3 hours. I swear, I kept this as short as possible. And we'll be back next week talking about corporate foundation, capital campaigns, and we'll spend a little bit of time talking about government grants. Have a great week.